Nerds. Nerds. Paleography nerds.
Hi, everybody.
All right.
Hi. Okay. Hi, my name is Laura Newman-Eckstein, and I am the Kaplan Curator of Judaica Digital Humanities here at the Penn Libraries. And thank you for being here for Integrating Manuscript Description and Knowledge Graphs, New Digital Models from Syriac Manuscripts in the British Library. And today our presenters are David A. Michelson, who is an Associate Professor of the History of Christianity at Vanderbilt University. His teaching and research focus on the history of Syriac Christianity in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. In particular, he is interested in the history of reading Syriac. His most recent book, 2022, is titled The Library of Paradise, A History of Contemplative Reading in the Monasteries of the Church of the East. Since 2010, Michelson has undertaken a series of digital humanities projects to make the history of Syriac culture better known through a series of online publications. Syriaca.org, the Syriac Reference Portal. The other presenter today is Will Potter. He currently serves as the Digital Library Curator at the Digital Lab at Vanderbilt University Library. And he is also the data coordinator for the Sinai Manuscripts Digital Library at UCLA, which collaborates with Syriaca.org on developing community standards and best practices related to linked open manuscript descriptions. In this role, Potter has helped author hundreds of new entries and written a number of scripts which updated their data. So, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Am I close enough to the mic here? I just want to thank Lynn, Ransom, a number of your other staff members, Alita, Betsy, Gabrielle, and all of the Schoenberg and library staff. This has been fun. The scholars clustering around the screen here at the end made the whole conference like icing on the cake. I've watched Schoenberg Symposium online for some time, so it's exciting to get to participate in one in person. In the time that follows, we'll be introducing our project, Syriac Manuscripts in the British Library, a digital edition of Wright's catalog. We just call it SMBL, so we'll use that, an acronym. We hope the lessons we've learned from the project will offer new insights into digital manuscript description in two main ways. First, our project's a case study of how modern digital projects might reuse, or if I may for the conference title, recirculate earlier finding aids, while also critically engaging with some of the problematic legacies of 19th century scholarship. Although our base data set was a print catalog, the digital version, we hope, has proved to be more than the sum of its parts. The project design intentionally sought to overcome some of the inherent limitations of the source catalog, such as its hierarchical arrangement and the biases associated with 19th century audiences. In order to accomplish this end, our project required a unique style of collaboration between historians, librarians, technologists, members of the Syriac heritage communities. This is a second area of insight from SMBL. Because the project was designed to serve the interests of both historians and librarians, the resulting data model combines standard codicological descriptions with emerging digital humanities methods, such as the use of linked open data graphs, with which Lisa referred us to in her keynote remarks. And we hope that these linked open data structures are a promising trajectory for a digital description of manuscripts. Now, let's see. University policy leads me to graciously thank our sponsors and also comply with the lawyers and tell you that I have a quote-unquote financial interest in a free and open source app. If you know how I can profit from my free and open source app, please come and see me after the talk. We are really grateful, especially to our developer, Winona Selesky. My colleague will pass out a couple of flyers about our project. So if the talk gets boring, you can either look at the manuscripts or get online. One's a Syriac Mappa Mundi, which is very fun. See if you can find the boot of Italy on the map, and I'll tell you if you're right after the talk. So the paper, in terms of our theme of circulations, here we might suggest it's not just the manuscripts themselves, but also their descriptions whose circulation is of interest to us. The paper asks two questions. First, could we recirculate old descriptions while fixing some of their deficiencies? And second, could we produce our digital catalog in a way that itself will allow maximum recirculation and reuse of our descriptions in the future? The presentation will proceed as follows. I'll largely cover the first topic, the methodological issues related from working from a highly accurate but also deeply flawed print-based catalog. And next, will discuss issues of digital design. Then I'll describe the project history and impact, and will conclude with actual tour of the website. Though, as I said, the most important parts are please play with the website, and we would love to hear your suggestions for how we might improve the project or insights from scholars working in other areas of manuscript studies. Let's see. This is just a sort of view of how we got. There's the original manuscript, the 19th century catalog, an XML rendering, and of course the website that you can access now. All, I guess, different views of the same data. But let me begin with what is Syriac. This is not a dense map. This is a maximal diachronic map saying where are places we might find Syriac manuscripts, inscriptions, rough mentions of Syriac influence. Syriac is a dialect of Aramaic that developed in the kingdom of Edessa, a city now in Turkey, beginning in the 1st century of the Common Era. It flourished in the Roman and Persian empires. Texts in Syriac comprise one of the largest surviving corpora of literature from the period of late antiquity. And it served as a lingua franca, and perhaps today more than 20,000 manuscripts or fragments written in Syriac survive, covering, as you can see, a wide geographic region. The oldest of these manuscripts are over 1,500 years old. And since 2010, Syriaca.org has been working to create high-quality digital reference tools for the study of Syriac. Here we are in the British Library. I'd like to, I'm really grateful that in the previous presentation we were reminded that the British Library was previously a subsidiary of the British Museum. This is the reading room you were referring to. It's also the same time that William Wright, who you can see here, was cataloging the Syriac manuscripts. Somewhere in this setting is Karl Marx writing Das Kapital. So an interesting place in the 19th century. With more than 1,000 Syriac manuscripts, the British Library holds one of the largest Syriac collections in the world. And it's difficult to overstate the foundational importance of this collection for Western scholarship over the last 2 centuries. The massive 3-volume catalog composed by Wright, coming in at 1,353 pages, 1,036 manuscript entries, was completed over an 11-year period and published in its full title, Catalogue of Syriac Manuscripts in the British Museum, acquired since the year 1838. And as I've said, for more than a century and a half, it stood as the standard reference in English on Syriac literature. Of course, London was not the first home of these manuscripts on the theme of circulation. The British Museum obtained most of the collection in the 1830s from the library of Dar al-Syrian, a Christian monastery belonging to the Syrian Orthodox Communion, found today in the Nitrian Desert of Egypt, originally founded in the 6th century. It served a Syriac language community until the 17th century and continues to be used today by the Coptic Church. Many of the Syriac volumes purchased by the British Library bear evidence of their long history in the monastery library. A sizable number can be traced, in fact, to a specific 10th century bibliophile abbot, Moses of Nisibis. In a 2004 article, Sebastian Brock paid tribute to Moses. The article is titled, "Without Moshe of Nisibis, Where Would We Be?" Brock suggests that more than 85% of all early surviving Syriac manuscripts, in other words, manuscripts that are older than the year 1000, likely have a provenance that passes through this monastery. In fact, this is, Western scholars, the earliest scribal dated manuscript of the Bible. Now, not the earliest Bible manuscript, but the one where the scribe took the courtesy of writing the date for us. And it's a Syriac Bible manuscript from Dar al-Syrian. Given the literary riches of the Syriac manuscript tradition, it's not surprising its catalog also became a foundational reference work. And I really, because I'm going to be critical of the catalog, want to impress upon you from the outset the astonishing nature of its scholarly achievement. It's a monumental work that took 11 years to produce. It's even more impressive when you consider it was the work largely of just one single scholar, composed by hand before the advent of computers or even typewriters. And the catalog was a product of an encyclopedic age. Antonio Panizzi was the principal librarian of the British Museum at this time. And as I said, at 1,353 pages, Wright's catalog is a unique and massive repository of information about Syriac manuscripts, literature, and culture. And yet, Wright's catalog represents a contradiction. It's a product of its age. His vision of Syriac literature was in fact largely deprecatory and even at times quite hostile towards Syriac literature. The catalog was designed to serve a specific set of Orientalist purposes, which we can now see were shaped by the values which predominated in 19th century Europe. Most notable is the fact that in spite of the rich 1,000-year history of the Dar el-Surian Library, Wright's description of the collection has no regard for the manuscripts in situ. Wright and his colleagues repeatedly decried a purported centuries-long decay of the library. So, for example, Wright's predecessor, William Cureton, gave this description of how the manuscripts arrived in the library. I'll just quote from it briefly here. You can see it says, "Beginning was torn away, from some the end, others from beginning and end. Loose quires, completely broken up into separate leaves, torn into separate leaves, mixed up together by time and chance, more completely than the greatest ingenuity could have effected." Of course, they're trying to build up their own work as catalogers, but basically they're portraying these. It's a motif of rescue that's commonly used in the 19th century to justify British colonial acquisition of cultural heritage. Cureton went on, "We cannot refrain from congratulating the learned of Europe that these manuscripts have been rescued from perishing in a vault in the desert of Africa." The emphasis on national context reveals the epistemological assumptions that shaped European encounters with Syriac manuscripts in the era. In Africa, the manuscripts were in the hands of incapable readers, ignorant monks. In the British Museum, the manuscripts were in the hands of enlightened scholars, capable of appreciating their value. This moral and civilizational argument is perhaps doubly useful because we now know, because it's quite well documented, that the story of the appropriation of these manuscripts was highly duplicitous and unscrupulous. I don't have time to get into that here. In the preface to his catalog, Wright put his own deprecatory opinion on plain display. I'm just going to read you the short underlined passage here. He saves his harshest words for scribes who dared to erase palimpsests for the purpose of copying new manuscripts. Quote, "In the 10th or 11th century, the transcribing of a volume of sermons brought with it the destruction of a Greek poet or a Latin historian, i.e. through erasure of palimpsests." Now, Will and I actually were asking ourselves, now that the catalog's done, we actually can't find any manuscripts where the palimpsest was either of these things. So this is highly imagined. Nevertheless, later, Wright gives this judgment on Syriac literature. He's really interested in a narrative of civilizational superiority in which Greek, Latin, etc. Are of greater value than Syriac texts. Here he says, "We must own that the literature of Syria is, on the whole, not an attractive one. They altogether lack the poetic fire of the older," we purposely emphasize the word, "the older Hebrews and of the Arabs. But they were apt enough as pupils of the Greek. They assimilated and reproduced, adding little or nothing of their own." So here we have the contradiction at the heart of his catalog. To be clear, the catalog is a highly detailed window into the richest collection of Syriac literature composed by a scholar who simultaneously held a low view of that literary tradition. We might describe his work as accurate in descriptive detail, yet misguided in its larger conclusions. And so the purpose of this present discussion of Wright and his contemporaries is not so much to fault their scholarship. Indeed, without their work, our own work would be impossible. Nor is it even necessarily to blame Cureton and Wright for sharing the Enlightenment, imperialist, and racist assumptions of their age, as reprehensible as those prejudices are. Rather, my goal here is to historicize their vantage point. Wright structured his catalog to serve the needs of a European scholarly audience for whom Syriac was a minor literary treasure to be mined alongside the greater canons of Greek and Arabic literature. Indeed, Wright's contract with the British Library forbids him from consulting the Arabic manuscripts while on the clock, because apparently it was such a, he would have rather spent his time with the Arabic manuscripts. Today, the question of how to reassess library and museum collections of the colonial era is an increasing concern. In the case of 19th century interpretive scholarship, something like this, it's often possible just to read the printed resources for cross purposes. In other words, even if one does not agree with Wright's dismissive description of a particular author, his work is still useful because his catalog can and help us find said author in a specific manuscript. So for this reason, until there's a recataloging of the entire British Library collection, please see me if you'd like to fund that, Wright's catalog remains not only useful, but essential to the field of Syriac studies. At the same time, the limitations of this catalog, I hope, are obvious and cannot be overcome merely through reading against the grain. Some aspects of the intellectual design of the catalog, and even of the material constraints inherent in the print medium, are at odds with the need of now a wide swath of modern readers, ranging from scholars to religious readers to members of the Syriac heritage communities. And it's in response to this conundrum that I conceived the SMBL project. The goal was to ask, would it be possible to use new media technologies to circumvent or even counteract some of the limitations of Wright's catalog, while still building upon and reusing his highly detailed manuscript descriptions? Just to be clear, he gives outlines of each manuscript that some of them are 5 levels deep in the outline. So they really set the standard. They're much richer than almost anything anybody's doing today, partly because he had so much time to sit with them. In other words, would it be possible to, quote, rewrite Wright to serve new and diverse audiences in a different time and place from the 19th century British Museum? To understand the methodological issues related to creating a digital catalog, and here's the contents of that catalog, we must first highlight some of the particular limitations of Wright's print catalog. Some are from the media itself, others from his perspectival biases. Perhaps the most notable limitation is a physical one. Now, of course, we can't fault Wright for using the best medium available in the 19th century. In fact, a small bragging point for Syriac studies is that Wright's printed Syriac catalog actually managed to come out before Panizzi's printed catalog of the English holdings. So actually, the British Library had a print catalog for Syriac while it was still using hand lists organized by author for English authors. In any event, we must note that, as is the case for all print catalogs, the organizational system is linear in format. One must either start at the front and work to the back, or else rely upon an index. In this linear format, the organizational hierarchy chosen by the author strongly shapes how readers access manuscript descriptions. Wright's design of the catalog was one of grouping the manuscripts, as you can see, according to a rather general set of topical genre classifications. Curiously, this topical approach to the collection often does not correspond to contemporary or even historical bindings of the codices. In other words, in the case of at least 120 codices, Wright actually divides them up and puts them in different thematic parts of the catalog. A scholar interested in the contents of a manuscript, as it's currently bound at the British Library, or even maybe it might have been previously bound at Dar el-Surian, might have to check multiple different places in the catalog just to see what's in one manuscript. In addition, this univocal scheme reflects how Wright privileged certain topics, such as the quest to recover lost works of Greek antiquity, and how he downplayed other topics, right? We'll go into a few examples here in a minute. So even within Syriac literature, Wright's genre classification is oriented around monumental authors, a sort of great books approach, if you will. His system was not sufficient to capture the complex nature of manuscript contents, particularly the multi-text manuscripts, which Wright often lumped together into this general category, theological, collected. You can see that really a lot of things get lost in this catalog. So collected authors, there's pages 631 to 904. Even when you're flipping through the section, it's really difficult to tell what's there unless you just read straight through each entry. The section, which we might call aesthetic miscellanies today, represents a large portion of the manuscripts, and Wright throws them all into this catch-all category. The design of Wright's catalog offers, in the end, a decontextualized vision of Syriac literature, which downplays miscellaneous and anonymous works. You can see anonymous works are a very tiny section in the catalog, but actually there are anonymous works in almost every manuscript that we come across, but they practically disappear in his organization. The net result is a catalog that overlooks widely read texts and also ignores the monastic context which preserved the manuscripts in the monastery. So Moses of Nisibis would not recognize his library in Wright's catalog. For instance, Wright was well aware that liturgical books made up a significant portion of the collection. Yet in his preface, he tersely notes, of the various classes of service books, the Nitrian collection comprises almost a, quote, superabundance of copies. Superabundance, indeed. This term is very telling. So here's the conundrum of the catalog again. On the one hand, when it comes to describing the contents of individual manuscript items, he's very accurate and detailed, 5 levels deep in the outline. He is generally exhaustive in collecting and accurately reproducing incipits, explicits, paratextual materials, and yet at the same time, his general organizational system for the catalog is a poor fit for the majority of the contents. One might suggest that it is designed to help the end user quickly bypass the superabundance of text that Wright was not interested in, and to quickly find the monumental authors of importance to Western canons. Now, today, of course, it's easier for us to identify a diverse landscape of users and their emerging information needs related to Syriac manuscripts, many of which Wright might never have imagined. For example, there's a growing recognition of the unique information needs of heritage communities with respect to what is indeed their own cultural patrimony. Wright's choice of genre terms limits the catalog's utility largely to Western scholarly audiences. Meeting the information needs of Western scholars meant obscuring much of the organizational system used by the monastic users of the manuscripts themselves. A new catalog might be able to undo some of these choices. Likewise, modern scholarly interests are now different from the 19th century. For example, scholars of book history, as we've just heard, are interested in the manuscripts as physical objects and seek precise and granular descriptions of the objects, histories of their use, and not just their existence as, quote, textual transmission technologies. In other words, the breadth of interested users and the depth of their novel information needs requires new tools. And we hope with our project to support multiple, even divergent and conflicting interpretations of the collection. Wright's catalog and its univocal access via genre is insufficient for these growing needs, and our project began by asking how a new digital catalog might contextualize or even counteract the structures of Wright's classification system. At this point, then, I want to transition to talking about some of the design for diverse knowledges. We're perhaps more than aware that a set of texts may fruitfully propose and produce a variety and multiplicity of interpretations. I'm not saying production of knowledge is arbitrary, but it is humanly impossible to anticipate the breadth of interpretation possible from a collection as rich as that of Dar el-Surian. The librarians of the age of Wright and Panizzi were confident that they might soon finish their work of cataloging and classifying. Panizzi thought that the British Library catalog would come to an end. They would have found everything important. Our own era has realized that the number of productive ways of organizing knowledge is infinite. And many other presentations here at the symposium are proof of the myriad ways and digital approaches to information architecture and how they offer flexibility over print media. Now, it's important to caution here, we're not assuming that digital solutions don't come without unintended consequences. Indeed, optimism about technological solutions is perhaps the most powerful mistaken assumption of our own age. But the medium and the message are symbiotic. So for some media are better suited to foster a diversity of interpretations. And so we've employed 3 methods from the digital humanities in the SMBL project with the hope to open up new avenues of scholarship. First, the technology we have adopted is to use an extensible digital format, TEI XML, a format that allows the digital data to be reorganized, sorted, serialized into data formats. Now, this is not unique to us. We received it from others. 2, the technological innovation of our project is that we've adapted our data model to also create a graph database. In order to avoid privileging particular genres or authors or even a hierarchy, we've sought to create a non-hierarchical way of organizing the information, namely RDF, linked open data graph database. This innovation will foster a variety of interpretive approaches. Lastly, we anticipate that the linked open data model will serve as the basis for a digital union catalog of Syriac manuscripts beyond our project. And so our last technical method is to embrace open access and a diverse knowledges approach. Because digital data can have diverse given interpretations, it's important that we free our data up to circulate widely. At this point, I'll invite my colleague Will Potter to come up and talk about some of the technical design of the project.
Yes, thank you, Dave. Thank you to all of you. So before looking at some of the maybe scary to some of you specifics of the technical implementation, I do want to linger on a few more specific methodological considerations for our project. Taking into account what Lisa reminded us of, knowing what our data is and what our data isn't. First of all, the SMBL database is not a recataloging of the Syriac manuscripts in the British Library. As Dave said, we would certainly love somebody to do that, or to provide funding for somebody to do that. However, our project did not have that budget, so our primary goal was much simpler: to make a digital edition of Wright's catalog reusing those descriptions. Our project is a digital representation of Wright's description of the manuscripts. For the most part, we have not compared Wright's entries against the manuscripts. However, this does not mean that we have willfully reproduced blatant errors found in Wright's catalog, of which we have found very few. If we were able, for instance, to determine from Wright's own entries that he had made a mistake, if he contradicts himself or omits information, we have made an effort to correct these obvious errors, including by checking the manuscripts if necessary. But we are not claiming any greater accuracy for our database beyond that of Wright's 19th century original. We are simply making it possible for users to access and query Wright's descriptions of the manuscripts in new ways. One area where we did depart from Wright when necessary was in defining what we consider to be distinct manuscripts or codicological units. In a dozen instances, Wright did not fully recognize what he described as a single manuscript was actually composed of multiple parts. This means, from a technical point of view, our catalog has identified new codicological units not numbered in Wright. In addition to these instances, almost 100 or more cases of palimpsests were found, and Wright did not separately describe in different entries the overtext from the undertexts. And so between those and the dozen or so other instances, we have a greater number of entries than Wright's original, 1,036, whereas our evaluation has identified 1,207 codicological units on the basis of his descriptions. One last methodological consideration, or one last point, is that we have not elected to remove or sanitize some of Wright's more egregious and derisive remarks concerning the scribes and monks who produced, used, and kept these manuscripts prior to their removal to the British Library. This does not mean that we have let such remarks stand without historical context. Rather, following best practices for describing historical information resources with potentially harmful content, we will be following the practice from the Digital Public Library of America and others to add standardized editorial notes that mark such passages and provide that historical context, which allows us to balance the preservation of this history with the sensitivity to how these materials are presented to and perceived by users. So with those sort of broad methodological considerations, we will now jump into talking about the more specific technical implementation, some of the technologies we use. The resulting database consists of 577 XML documents, so you can see a snippet of one of those documents on the screen here. Each of these documents correspond to a shelf-marked manuscript object from the British Library collection. 178 of these documents represent composite manuscripts, meaning they contain more than one distinct codicological unit, which Wright described across several different entries in his catalog. So these are represented as sort of manuscript parts within the same XML document. This allows us to represent the shelf-marked objects whose descriptions were scattered throughout the 3-volume catalog in a manner more closely resembling the current physical reality of the collection, while retaining the granularity of rights descriptions for the composite manuscripts. Storing data in the semi-structured XML format as well fits the needs of manuscript cataloging and its interest in preserving the nuance and ambiguity of manuscript sources, while at the same time providing structured access points for resource discovery. The content of the manuscript's descriptions derive from the richness and complexity of Wright's catalog, with certain data points extracted into more structured and controlled fields, folio extent, the support material, the form of the manuscript, its production dates, and so forth. In particular, SMBL has adopted and extended the shared standards of the Text Encoding Initiative, or TEI, guidelines, which are a set of 500 XML tags which have been curated and defined by a scholarly user community for nearly 4 decades. The TEI guidelines include a subset of XML tags to support manuscript description, so each record conforms, or will conform, to an XML schema deriving from the TEI's manuscript's description module, and specifically a customization of that called the Consolidated TEI Schema, which is used by the Theorist Union Catalog, as well as several UK memory institutions for their manuscript metadata, the British Library, the Bodleian Libraries, Cambridge University Library, John Rylands Library, and the Wellcome Trust. Our project then, from this consolidated TEI schema, has further extended it to align with Syriac.org's practices. For example, for named entity identification, so for the person and place names, the consolidated schema recommends using local authority files stored within the same document, whereas our project has adapted that to use Syriac.org's linked identifiers. Documentation of this schema, including where we've diverged from the TEI and the consolidated schemas, is still a work in progress, but is publicly available at the URL on the screen under our documentation page. The use of this shared data format promotes the interoperability of SMBL descriptions with other cataloging projects. For example, our XML records may be ingested into the British Library system, which follows the consolidated schema, to become the canonical metadata record for their digital finding aids. Likewise, SMBL records could be aggregated along with several partner projects to form the basis for a digital union catalog of Syriac manuscripts. On top of the core set of XML documents containing the rich manuscript descriptions, we are building in linked data and knowledge graph capabilities. This design feature is a relatively new innovation among digital manuscripts catalogs, so we've heard examples already this weekend, and we'll hear more of its use in other projects. For our purposes, whereas XML allows us to record the hierarchical and complex manuscript descriptions from Wright, serializing these documents into linked data knowledge graphs creates non-hierarchical, multivocal access pathways into and across the collection. A knowledge graph will allow users to better trace the networks among and between these objects and other relevant entities, and will permit them to rearrange the collection according to many more criteria than was possible with the print catalog. What that looks like specifically is that we have minted a uniform resource identifier, which means we've created and assigned a unique identifier called a URI, not only for each manuscript object, each shelf-marked object, but also for each of those distinct manuscript parts. Maintaining these separate URIs for each part allows for more granular search and browse capabilities based on part-specific features like support material, date, script. In other words, although they are encoded within the same document, query results can be correlated to the individual part. Within the document as well, several key types of data, content items, additions, scribal hand descriptions, decoration descriptions, receive locally unique or unique at the document level identifiers, particularly by XML IDs, for those familiar with how TEI works. In serializing this data then as a linked data knowledge graph, these identifiers can become URIs for those particular types of data. So there will be a unique identifier for each content item, for each scribal hand, and so forth. And this will facilitate even more granular quantitative analysis of these aspects of manuscript descriptions. In addition to preparing the manuscript data for use within linked data applications, SMBL itself utilizes the Syriac.org knowledge graph, which maintains authority files for persons places, works, and bibliographic items relevant to Syriac studies, and it provides URIs for each of these entities. SMBL uses these URIs for known authors and works, but also for the scribes, readers, and former owners of these manuscripts, as well as their places of production and circulation. The integration with the Syriaca.org knowledge graph can contextualize these manuscripts within the broader domain of Syriac studies, and vice versa, as the manuscript URIs lay the groundwork for expanding the set of entities available within the Syriaca.org knowledge graph. Moreover, it enables advanced search and browse functionality, such as permitting users to collate all of the witnesses to a given author's work, then filter or sort these results based on additional criteria, their date of production, their place of production, their support material, and so on. Finally, to encourage the reuse of the manuscript descriptions and knowledge graph, all of the data and application code for the project are released under open and permissive licenses and hosted in an open access repository stored on GitHub. And we will also deposit all data and project code in the Vanderbilt University Institutional Repository, as well as the research data repository Zenodo. Sharing data in this way allows future scholars to ingest and reuse the data set for their own analysis workflows. And in addition, it allows us to serialize our linked data and share it with other projects interested in ancient and medieval linked data, such as the Pelagios community or the Historical Middle East Data Alliance. Oops, not yet. The above are the core components of the data set, which will not change and are extractable from the platform, again, as Lisa reminded us of good sustainable data practices. However, we are in the process of rebuilding the server and application layers through which most users will interact with the data set. At present, the data are stored in a customized ExistDB instance we have developed called the Strophe web application. The Strophe app is an open source database designed to support digital humanities research and the history of culture and functions as a publication platform for TEI documents with linked data capabilities. While the Strophe app and the ExistDB architecture have served our needs for over a decade, we have recently concluded that they are reaching the end of their life due to increasing stability and downtime. So as a whole, Syriaca.org is in the process of developing a replacement solution, Gadel, for our web application. So this is the application architecture. It is designed for simplicity, maintainability, and the integration with our current data creation and publishing workflow via GitHub. In the new Gadel applications, GitHub Actions are used to process and transform XML formatted data and automate the continuous integration and delivery of data and code updates to the OpenSearch search engine for indexing, and then to Amazon Web Services for viewing on this website as flat HTML files. Data updates trigger reindex of the OpenSearch platform, and then we have an API gateway that allows the searches and queries to be performed on those, which enables more effective and equitable global access through the use of Amazon CloudFront for faster load times, which is crucial in places with limited bandwidth. The combination of OpenSearch for indexing and an API gateway for querying provides a flexible and scalable research environment, which leverages cloud services, fosters collaboration, enhances data discoverability, and promotes broader access to critical cultural research. Our hope is to migrate to this new application infrastructure in early 2025. I will now turn it back to Dave for a few development credits.
So just stay up here because we'll just do this super briefly. You're only seeing two of us. A decade's worth of undergraduates and master's students have helped out on the project. There we are with a tiny version of the British Library. And we couldn't do this without a number of developers, Winona Selesky, Aaron Geyer, also Dr. George Kiraz, a member of the Syriac heritage community, and also a leading digital humanities scholar in Syriac studies, has served as our advisor throughout the project. So this is much more than two people. We'll just give you a quick snippet view of what it looks like to use the project, and then we'll take questions.
So so just a very quick overview of some of the features through the website. So from the homepage, which there's a QR code, there's also one on the flyer, and there's the link as well. So we encourage you to explore it on your own. Users from the homepage can choose to browse the full collection, perform advanced search, or do just a basic keyword search. For example, searching for the person name Ephraim, one gets 145 results. From these results, then you can facet or narrow these search results by various criteria, the date range, script material. Already, some of these present advantages over Write, as while Write provides an index of securely dated manuscripts, our date filter also includes those for which we only have estimates based on paleographic dating. Each record page then, as I said, represents a shelf-marked object. You can see the first box is its specific URI. This is for the overall shelf-marked object. We provide some basic manuscript overview information, followed by a physical description. This is all copied from Write. Unfortunately, we don't have as much structured data from the physical description as we do for manuscript contents, but we do pull out the hands and the decoration descriptions where we can. Then there's a manuscript contents section, which provides the title and author information, as well as the Syriac title in the form of a rubric, incipit, explicits, other excerpts that Write provides for us, various notes about bibliographic items relevant to a particular content item. Below the manuscript contents then is a list of the additions. So these are marginal notes, colophons, later additions to the manuscript. So we provide the folio location of those and either Write's excerpt or summary of what those are. For multi-part manuscripts or composite manuscripts, those again are also on their own page as they are represented in a single document. However, you can see the URI for the overall manuscript 415, as well as links to the individual parts, in this case the two parts for the sets of folios that Write has described separately. They receive their own URIs. Finally, just a quick overview of some of the advanced search features. Here are some of the more specific targeted field searching that are available, including searching in the Syriac text, thanks to the work of Robert Ideen, who was an early collaborator and retyped all of Write's Syriac by hand, since Syriac OCR was not a thing yet back then. Just as an example search, then, we might look at the place name, searching for the place name that Write has for Deir al-Suryan. Provides 130 results. If we were to then limit that to the origin place, you can see you can search specifically by places, known places of origin, and that provides only 13 results.
Great. Yeah, I think we'll pause there. Other than just to say, this is still a work in progress, as all digital projects are, I suppose. But we're very near to what we hope will be the sort of 1.0 release in the spring. But it's not too late to add new features if they're essential. So we'd love to hear your suggestions.
Now is the time for questions. So, okay, there are a lot. So we're going to start with you, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you. This is such a brilliant project and so important, and it's clear you put a lot of care and thought into it. I was actually going to ask about whether the Syriac was discoverable in Syriac, so thank you for answering that. I was wondering about Write's transliterations, if they're internally consistent, or are there variants that you had to account for? Like you searched for Ephraim, did he always transcribe that name the exact same way, or did you somehow have to account for that?
So that's a great question. One, he's very, very careful. So, I would say all of our criticisms are at the macro rather than the micro level of his work. So he's very consistent. The problem is he's working before, this is not to brag, just to be blunt about it. Our project is the first to create authority standards for Syriac names. So he's working well before we have authorities for most Syriac names. And in many cases, he uses forms that scholars wouldn't use today. That's where eventually the magic of linked data will happen, which is if you put in any name form that we have in our linked data, then it'll use the URI, it'll search instead for the URI and Write, and it'll return. So you don't actually need to know what he calls the name of the author or the place. That's great.
And I would add, even currently, though it's a bit buggy, and so we didn't choose to use it. Even currently, certain of the advanced search fields, author, and unfortunately, I don't think place name, you can include a plain text name, but you could also, if you know the URI of the person that you're interested in, you can actually just into that box input that person's URI, and it will find all instances where there's a tag name that is.
So that would be the most comprehensive results. That's great.
A generation of Vanderbilt undergraduates have had to learn what a URI is when they thought they were actually being a classics major.
Thank you very much for that. It brings me a lot of joy to see more graphs on the screen. So I have one question which is based mostly out of morbid curiosity. You are working with the British Library. How have recent events at the British Library affected this project?
Sure. Well, there's our graph, but actually I'll skip back to, so here are some of our collaborators. That's Michael Erdman, and he's been really, really generous and supportive to us. The late Alana Tahan really shepherded the project with us for many years. And we've really benefited from support from them. Yes, having things go down has been bad for everyone. On the other hand, we've really received positive feedback from the British Library that actually they're quite happy that this wasn't on their server, and it's made them generally more interested in having distributed collaboration. So eventually our goal is to serve the records into their system, but we would continue to have our separate version. One of the reasons we use Amazon rather than a university domain is, we have users in restricted countries. So Iran, for example, Israel. If it was on a certain domain, it might, Russia. The resource might be blocked depending on which country you're in or accessing from. So our goal is to, really make it open to a variety of users.
I just had a couple quick questions. I liked the layers screen at the end. Is that,
Let's see.
I was wondering to what extent you can explore that backwards from the outcome. Like, can I click through and see the facsimile of the original catalog, and can I click through and see the
Yes,
manuscript?
in fact, if you click, well, so you didn't ask about how did the archive.org going down affect us. If you click right here, you will load the archive.org page of the original catalog. And we may eventually embed that in a viewer, though we're trying to fit, rights descriptions are so thick, they barely fit on the screen already. But so yeah, from every page you can see Wright's original depiction there.
And the manuscript?
Well, that would be ideal. That would be in the 2.0. So
I also wonder about how do you affect the kind of, you talked about the importance of granularity. Of course, archive.org is really only going to take you to, is it taking you to the page?
yeah,
Or
we were able to
the
link
segment of the
directly to
page?
the page.
Just the page, that's just.
Yeah,
version.
we could explore using the IIIF manifest there in some way. For now, we're just serving you to the page.
And can you estimate how much does your budget have an estimate for how much the AWS, like an annual cost?
Oh, wow. I wish we could. We actually will know that better once we move to this new app. Because in the old app, we tried to piggyback and have all of our apps ride together on the same server for cost.
Yeah.
But that meant if one of them went down, they all went down. So
Well, you must have, it can't be more than, right? Or
well,
could
but
explode on
it
you?
included not only like all of the DH projects at Vanderbilt were all riding on the same AWS instance. So more than just mine. Yes. Anyway, I would say we could get back to you. I don't know. When I inquire about this, the number is generally very low. At one point we said, okay, we want to put it into a grant budget, and they said, all right, put in $1,000 a year for hosting. But that's a highly inaccurate estimate.
Low or high? Low, I think.
Too low.
Well, it depends on the architecture, how many other apps we were sharing the server with, what Amazon's rates were that day, et cetera.
My question is about, you mentioned the sort of duplicitousness of the way in which a lot of these manuscripts arrived at the British Library. Would you be willing to elaborate?
Well, I unfortunately don't need to because the sources often brag about it. So, you can just go read Lord Curzon's own description of how he acquired some of his manuscripts. And in my book, The Library of Paradise, I have a whole chapter that talks about the acquisition process. And it's Columbus Stewart at Himmel who's described this, I think, as the most egregious of all of the European acquisitions of Eastern Christian materials. So.
Wow. Oh, okay, we'll go to you next.
Okay, on a more boring point then, and would love to hear that story. So if you imagine that this will be integrated into the British Library catalog, but at the same time you want to maintain your own identity on your website, so how will you work with version controlling? I mean, if the British Library starts to get feedback and starts to amend their records, you start to amend your record, what will the pipeline be?
That's a good question. Here we benefit from being a niche scholarly field. I hope the live stream's not recording. Call my field that. Meaning every memory institution we've collaborated with, their response has basically been, thank you, we're happy for you to help us here because, it's likely we'll never have, someone with that level of, expertise. So I think in our particular case, we'll just be able to continue, I hope, to work closely. Also, the British Library's own cataloging, once it's there, at least, in our experience, it doesn't change very frequently. So, yeah, I don't know that that'd be really replicable, someone working on Latin or Greek manuscripts or, Arabic manuscripts. It's very much different scale.
First, this is fantastic. So really excited by what you've done. My question has to do with the decision to correct right where there are mistakes, and I wanted to know a little bit more about that. Perhaps if you could give an example, and I'm curious whether or not consumers of your data will know where that's happened.
That's a good.
Yes, so I don't know that I can give a specific example, but a sort of one of the kinds of cases that we found would be based on where Wright, there are occasionally places where Wright will say in his kind of initial paragraph where he's giving the physical description, the way he describes it will make it sound like it's already made of multiple manuscripts. So this is, I mean, really in general, one of the, my own personal frustrations with Wright's catalog is there are no clear documentations in kind of his general methodology or even in these specific cases of why he divided manuscripts in a certain way. There are a few, so it really comes down to if we were able to determine from kind of an internal inconsistency in how a particular entry in Wright describes the sort of physicality of multiple manuscripts, we may have made the decision to divide those into different parts. In all of those cases, we will, of course, be signaling through editorial notes that users will be able to see. For cases like that, for cases where we have to say we have no idea without looking at the manuscript and studying it ourselves what the situation might be here. We also have notes that sort of say our description is incomplete, or there's a much more complex transmission history than we're able to replicate in this in XML.
And we've used standardized language. So if someone wanted to find all of the places where we made an intervention, we've used the attribute values in the TEI to, mark sorts of things. And then there's also a prose statement that would appear on that particular entry saying, we've made a correction here. So there shouldn't be any places where we've silently corrected Wright, for example.
So it sounds like the way you did it is driven by making sure the application will work for your users.
Right. And we did have, I didn't put their names up here. Let's see if we can go back to them. This summer, we had an international team of what are they, 14 review editors. All of these are scholars in Syriac studies. And between them, they read through all 1,200 entries. We did find it very difficult to hold them back and say, okay, look, I know you really want to recatalog this entire thing. And please do that. When we're done, we'll provide a linked data environment. You can post your own description right next to it.
Well, that'd be cool.
Anybody else? Okay.
Again, I echo everyone here who said it already, a wonderful project. Quick question, I'm curious how you make the data available for reuse. Is there a Sparkle endpoint or how does that process work if you wanted to get the data?
Yeah, we're interested in making it available as in many ways as possible. So, I began this project in 2010. As soon as we had text documents with just the English, scholars could write and get those. Then we had text documents that had everything. The TEI is all on GitHub. And then we do have a Sparkle endpoint. It's just in the testing phase. So right now, it doesn't have a public API, but eventually it'll have a public API. So we're really open to whatever format. Totally unbeknownst to us, a PhD student at the Hebrew University downloaded our GitHub repository and used it to write his dissertation on linguistic analysis of loanwords in Syriac. So, it is out there in the wild, and we do find people using it already.
That's great. Thank you.
Anybody else?
I guess I have one more question. No one else does. Thank you.
How many of the authorities that you've established are new versus how is your work connecting up with the work that Himmel is doing on authorities?
Great. Those are actually two sort of separate questions.
Yeah.
In that much of the Syriac authorities at Himmel have come from our collaboration with them.
Oh, great.
So they're taking those from our author and place files. In some cases, they already had them, and so we need to have a reciprocal. But the field of Syriac studies has not had vast resources. So I don't know which of our. Do you know any of the statistics offhand?
In terms of how many?
Yeah, I mean, one example would be, before we made our author file, the previous author file, if you want to even call it, that was a print book from 1922, and I think it had 600 authors, and I think we have.
Just authors, it's probably almost double that.
Right.
We also have sort of saints and other people in that.
Yeah, for saints, that volume
Close
had
to 3,000.
400. That one was from 2004, and it listed 400 saints, and I think we have 1,600 saints.
1,600
wow.
saints. I think
So-
it's 3,000 persons overall.
That's awesome. Really
And then
exciting.
what's really exciting is the amount, and a lot of what the review editors found were the amount of new person scribes and new places and things that weren't involved. I think for persons, there's probably close to 1,000, if not more. Persons that most likely don't have any sort of known entity beyond this, and so the need to create semi-local authority files will be really important and really exciting to kind of uncover.
Fantastic.
I think it's time for lunch.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Where's lunch? No, it's fine. Please.
Great.
Where should I tell them?
We were still overly optimistic on how much we fit in, but I think it all worked.
I don't want to